Do you find yourself putting everyone else's needs before your own? Do you find yourself almost making yourself automatically subservient to others? If yes, you might have the fawn response. The fawn response is a people pleasing behavior where you prioritize other people's needs over your own, often at quite a self sacrifice. You might also prioritize their wants over your own needs. And it sometimes happens so automatically, you're not even really aware you're doing it until you're well into it. And it can be driven by a real fear of conflict, a desire to avoid any disapproval, and a desire to stay in a relationship rather than take care of yourself. So, the fawn response usually develops in childhood when your caregivers are either neglectful or abusive. And as a child, you are dependent on your caregivers to take care of you. So it is a real survival need to stay connected to the caregivers. And if you learn young that in order to stay connected, you have to squash your own needs, definitely squash your own desires and wants, and prioritize the other person's needs, wants, and probably emotions, then you learn this habit of fawning or people pleasing in order to survive. So the degree to which it's ingrained in your old brain is very, very strong. When things are embedded as a survival response, they can automatically dictate our behavior for a long time until we learn how to change our behavior, calm our bodies. We'll talk about that. But until we learn to do it differently, it might feel so automatic we don't even feel like we have a choice. The fawn response is most often related to complex childhood trauma where the traumatic events or the absence of connection, I think we can also just say the absence of connection to the caregiver or the abusive events are ongoing. It's not like a one time trauma, it's sort of an ongoing theme and atmosphere of childhood. So, in these situations, it's actually very adaptive for the child to learn to please, even excessively please and appease the caregiver. It's adaptive because it is needed for their survival. So, this brings us to a really important point. If you would like to understand your own fawning behavior, or if you are trying to understand somebody else who has habitual fawning behavior, is that the fawning developed as a survival response to stay in relationship. So you will see people talk about the fawn response and say things like, people who fawn try to create safety by staying in relationship, or that they seek safety by merging with the other person's needs, desires, etc. And while this is kind of true, I don't think that that is phrased in a way that really resonates with the feeling of fawn behavior. And I'm not sure it's the best way to think about it when you begin to try to get over fawning behavior. Because the real thing is that the fawning developed when the safest choice was to stay in relationship, even if it was with somebody abusive. As a child, that was unfortunately the safest choice. So that urgency, that drive to fawn, that drive to people please, feels like a total necessity. And the habitual pattern remains even when it is no longer a necessity. So, for most of us as adults, yes, absolutely, we need relationships, to be happy and healthy, etc. Healthy relationships are great, but the urgency to really sacrifice your own values and needs is no longer required. Because if you're in a relationship that requires that, you probably don't need to maintain that relationship. I'm not saying this is easy, not easy at all, but to begin to think about this, that survival response is not needed today. It was needed when this was developed. So this brings us to the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And you will see fawn often talked about as a fourth F. I actually think it's different, and I'll tell you quickly why. And if you'd like to know more on this, let me know. I'll create a video on it. But the fight, flight, freeze response really is part of our reptilian brain. It is not about relationship. It doesn't tie into language centers in particular. It's an automatic, quick response to flee, fight, or freeze in the face of immediate danger. So people with the fawn response, it probably comes from a freeze or a flight. Most people with the fawn response are either fleers or freezers. But the fawning actually utilizes kind of higher level cognition areas of the brain, as well as it also utilizes the part of our autonomic nervous system, which is about relationship and connection, which are not utilized by the amygdala. But I brought this up, and I brought up the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, not so much to debate that point, because really, however it helps you to think about it, that's the best way to think about it. But so similar to the fight, flight, freeze, fawning behaviors can be adaptive in certain situations. The problem with all four of those is when they are automatically applied in situations that don't require them. So in the series of videos I just did on the freeze response, if you are faced with immediate life-threatening danger and you can't flee and you can't fight, freeze can be the most adaptive. And if you're in a situation like that and fawning will get you out of it, that can be the most adaptive. So any one of these responses, if it's applied in a situation where it makes sense, it can actually be helpful. What you don't want is an automatic response of fawning in situations where it's not needed, or an automatic response of freezing at a work meeting, or fighting at a work meeting where you start a fist fight, right? That would be an excessive fight response that is going to have negative consequences down the line. Let me know if this makes sense. So knowing that your fawn response developed to keep you in relationship, to keep you safe when you were a child, became a habitual pattern, and now it's automatic almost in your relationships that you're prioritizing the connection and fearing any disconnection, thereby fearing any conflict, thereby actually sacrificing your relationship with yourself to maintain a relationship with the other, and that in most situations you're in, that is no longer the best choice for you. So we want to move these things, and I know you're going to say, okay, well, how? And we will get there, but you're going to move these things into the part of your brain where you can assess your choice. So a few characteristics of people who developed a habitual fawn response: in general, afraid of conflict, very afraid of using language that might be seen as aggressive. So often when children grow up in a household with an abuser who uses very aggressive language, there might be one child who ends up mimicking that, and that's the role they develop. And then the other child or the other children will avoid being in that role at all cost. They don't want to do anything that would make them seem like they were the abuser. And then to add to that, being aggressive in an environment with somebody who's aggressively abusive puts you in more danger usually. So again, that whole safety issue. But a key here is that communication can be assertive, not passive and not aggressive. And finding that middle ground can be difficult. I'm going to talk about this more in my video next week, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. But I'm going to talk about developing the assertive language where it's sort of like assertive language is, I'm okay, you're okay. Passive is, you're okay, but I'm not. And aggressive is, I'm okay and you're not, right? So if you keep that in mind, I'm okay, you're okay language could be, you do you, but I don't want to be around for it. So this is hinting at some of the behaviors that will be developed as you heal, and that actually those behaviors help you heal. So there's a there's an effect where our change in behavior impacts how we feel impacts our behavior. Changing some of these behaviors will improve your self-esteem. That will make it easier to change behaviors. I do have a boundary course that goes into a lot of this. It goes into the assertive language, how you figure out what that is. It goes into the emotional regulation that is actually really the first step, because before you can improve boundaries, before you can really change your behaviors, those emotional regulation tools are needed to calm your amygdala, calm that fight, flight, freeze, and thereby calm the fawning response, strengthen the observer who sees what's happening, and the observer helps to say, okay, we don't really have to sacrifice ourselves right now. And even if it feels a little bit scary, and even if it makes me a little anxious to do it, I can still do it. And maybe the first step is I can imagine myself doing it. And then next time I can do it. Anyway, looping back to the assertive language. So most people who fawn have passive language, terrified of the aggressive language. The fear of abandonment is ingrained. I think it's probably obvious by this point of the video as to why that happened. And it makes sense. And then understanding that can help you begin to heal that part of yourself, to realize that creating conflict in a relationship, or allowing conflict, really, it's more like allowing conflict to happen, which actually in relationships where both people are healthy enough can actually be a healthy thing for the relationship, but definitely healthy for you in caring for your own needs and your own self and desires. Our wishes are important too, not just our needs. Low self-esteem is usually a component of people with a habitual fawn response. So the low self-esteem contributes to fawning, and then the fawning contributes to low self-esteem. Again, these things are all tied together. Codependency issues, where you feel like it's almost your responsibility to emotionally care for the other, that if anybody else is upset, first priority, take care of them, take care of their needs, their emotions, right? And this is super common in kids who are parentified. And parentification can be sort of like practical task oriented, where the child has to act as the parent to do tasks, but it is also and usually emotional parentification, where the child is trained, basically trained, to take care of the parent's emotions. Okay, so we laid out a lot of the problem. I understand. And next week, I'm going to come out with a video on how to heal, 9 different points broken into 3 categories. So make it easy and digestible and practical tools. But before we go there, for this week, the emotional regulation, the awareness that the fawning is driven by a fear that makes you believe that maintaining the relationship is more important than taking care of yourself, and just bringing that to mind and questioning it. Check out the boundary program I have, because it really is quite geared for people who are people pleasers, parentified, and have fawning behaviors. The link will be in the description. There probably should be a link that pops up right here, depending on what device you're watching on, that you can click on just to get information on that in case it's helpful. Any questions, let me know. I look forward to seeing you next week.